station, yeah, it's time for hemp. Oh, an acre of hemp makes 20 barrels of oil. No need for pesticides to poison all our soil. People got no food, they got no clothes, they got no rest. Well, right now it's time for hemp.
Thank you for taking Time for Hemp. I'm your host, Casper Leitch. You are listening to Time for Hemp at Tumblr, SoundCloud, iTunes, YouTube, and of course, iHeartRadio. We are the only all-cannabis broadcasting network on iHeartRadio, and we appreciate it when you share us with your friends. It is Monday, and on Monday we like to celebrate what cannabis can do for the spirit, the body, and the mind, because it is a medical wonder. And every Monday we like to have as our joint host Lynn Mathre and Al Byrne from Patients at a Time. And remember, anytime you hear the word joint on the big broadcast, nearly 2.5 million people all around the world hit their pipes, their bongs, their vaporizers, and twist up their joints to take time for hemp. With that said, I pass this joint conversation over to my joint host, Lynn and Al. Good morning, Lynn. Good morning, Al.
Good morning, Casper. And of course, on the East Coast here, it's already afternoon. But good afternoon and good morning to everybody. We're here representing Patients Out of Time. You can find our information at www.medicalcannabis.com. For the last 20 years or so, 19 and a half to be exact, we have been teaching healthcare professionals and the U.S. public about the clinical and other therapeutic uses of cannabis. We've been teaching people about the nutrition of cannabis, and we've been teaching people about the endocannabinoid system, which is found in all living creatures except insects. Your dog has an endocannabinoid system. The shark in the ocean has an endocannabinoid system, and the American eagle has an endocannabinoid system. And if your doctor or your nurse does not know what the endocannabinoid system is, I would offer them two choices. Learn right away, or I'm going to go get another doctor. In order for them to learn about the endocannabinoid system and the other therapeutic uses of cannabis, they can go to medicalcannabis.com, where there is a direct link to the University of California School of Medicine in San Francisco, where they can take several courses of 10 or 12 CEUs, CMEs in the aggregate, or they can go to www.themedicalcannabisinstitute.org, where your doctors and nurses and your pharmacists can take courses more in line of 3 or 4 CMEs and learn about the clinical uses of cannabis in the endocannabinoid system for a fee, a reasonable fee, in the privacy of their home or their office. And I recommend that as patients, you get all of your healthcare professionals to become acquainted and educated about cannabis as a medicine. In order to do that today, which is Monday is our habit, of course, of having professionals, generally healthcare professionals, who come in with great expertise on the various aspects of cannabis. One of the conversations that's been lacking, really, in this overall work that we do has been the pharmacological aspects of cannabis. Early on in Mary Lynn's first book, Cannabis in Medical Practice, we discussed some of the pharmacological attributes, but that was quite a while ago. And so today our guest is Michael Backus, and Michael is the author of Cannabis Pharmacy, a subtitle, The Practical Guide to Medical Marijuana. We'll have to talk to Michael about that, but it's evidence-based information on using cannabis for ailments and conditions, and plus a comprehensive guide to the most popular varieties of cannabis. And there's a foreword on the book by one of our good friends in the movement and one of our good friends to Patients Out of Time, Dr. Andrew Weil. So good morning, Michael.
Good morning, Al and Marilyn.
Where do we find you today? Where are you hiding out?
Los Angeles, California.
Los Angeles. Is that your usual homestead?
That's my usual homestead. I've been here for almost 30 years.
Okay. Wow, okay. Not many of you guys exist for 30 years, I've heard out there. Look, one of the things we like to do is just to give our listeners, we do have 2.5 million listeners around the world, Michael, and we'd like to give them a little bit of a snapshot about who we're talking to, and that requires you to tell us. If you could give us a little background, your education, how you got into the cannabis world, and what brought you to write Cannabis Pharmacy.
Well, study biology. I got sucked into the.
All right, hold on. We got a really bad connection. I don't know if somebody's got their speaker up and we got an echo or what. Can you turn your speakers down and then can you talk, Mr. Backus?
Okay, how's that?
Well, I need to hear more than 2 words.
Okay, no worries. So, just want me to continue with what I was saying?
All right, now that sounds good. Now, let's redo your introduction. We're able to, this is a pre-recorded show, so I'll edit this out. But when you said hello, and then when you gave the proper announcement of your name, this sounded like it was breaking up, but I wasn't sure, and I wanted to hear a bit of a conversation, and I was right. There was a problem. So Al, just go ahead and redo your intro, and then start the conversation.
Today we'd like to welcome a cannabis expert to the show. His name is Michael Backus. Michael has produced a brand new book called Cannabis Pharmacy, The Practical Guide to Medical Marijuana, which is also says on the label, on the cover, that it's evidence-based information on using cannabis for ailments and conditions, plus a comprehensive guide to the most popular varieties. The book Cannabis Pharmacy has a foreword by one of medical cannabis's supporters and an excellent friend of Patients Out of Time, Dr. Andrew Weil. Michael, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks a lot, Al.
And I understand from a previous conversation you're coming to us from Los Angeles. And what we'd like to do, Michael, is just to inform our listeners, is about 2.5 million of them around the world, a little bit about your background, your education, and how you came to cannabis and how you came to write this real nice book, Cannabis Pharmacy.
Well, thanks. I studied biology in college and then worked in the entertainment industry for 20 years, founded the American Film Institute's Digital Media Studies program. And I worked with Michael Crichton, the novelist, for many years, and it really kind of tuned my research skills. And when my doctor recommended that I try cannabis for a persistent form of migraine headache, it really worked for me, but I couldn't get a lot of evidence-based information at the time. And I just started researching it, and just kind of fell into the rabbit hole. And for the last 7 years, I started a dispensary in Los Angeles that was one of the first science-based dispensaries. I went to a few Patient Out of Time conferences and talked to a lot of physicians. And I read just an enormous amount of research, which led me to write this book. I wanted to really basically collate all of the research I'd done over almost the last decade and kind of translate it for the average person and physician who might not be so familiar with the latest scientific research on the application of cannabis as a medicine.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you said that, because the average physician in the United States, and I don't mean that, it's not the average, 99.9% of the physicians in the United States have no idea how to use cannabis medically. They just don't. And they certainly don't understand the endocannabinoid system. So your book is right timely. Let's start at the beginning with you. You were a patient before you became an author here. How long did those headaches bother? I've been afflicted in my past with what they call cluster headaches, which is a sub-level of migraines, I believe.
Well, I've had migraines since I was an adolescent. And for years I tried to find conventional medications that would help me with them. I get what's called a hemiplegic migraine, which is a very, very severe form of the headache. It has, can have mild paralysis and visual disturbances, and they're really completely unpleasant. And the idea that migraine might be treated with cannabis goes back quite a ways. Ethan Russo has done some interesting, Dr. Ethan Russo has done some interesting kind of historical overviews of the use of cannabis for headache. And he was the first person whose work I was exposed to who talked about the potential for migraine being related to a syndrome that he calls basically endocannabinoid deficiency. And so what I do is I take a very small amount of cannabis a few times a week, and it has reduced my headache frequency dramatically from a couple times a week to maybe once a year tops. So it's really worked very, very well for me as a medicine.
Yeah, so you're using this basically as a prophylactic, is that right?
Yeah, as prophylaxis, it's really, really effective for me. And I feel that in my own experience, I really never had that kind of relief from any conventional medication. There were medicines out there that could intervene when I had the headache, but I'd not found anything that could actually reduce the frequency and intensity of the headaches. And cannabis did that for me.
When you say cannabis, can you give us an idea of how much you take in a given week and your application method?
Well, it varies a little bit. I mean, I've used vaporizers, I've used smoked cannabis, I've used sublingual, and I've used oral. And the truth is, as long as the dose is somewhere in the range of around 2.5 to 5 milligrams of THC or equivalent, and about 10% of that typically in CBD, it works really, really well for me. And I've kind of, toyed with this formulation over the years for myself. Once I got access to laboratory results that told me actually what was in the cannabis medicines I was taking.
Right. Well, Dr. Ethan Russo, of course, has been a prominent member of our board of advisors for years, and is a good friend of Mary Lynn and I. And actually, Mary Lynn has co-authored a book or two with Ethan, and we really respect his judgment. And he gave me the same advice as well on migraine headaches, and I did find that while they did not eliminate them, they did, and they didn't seem to really reduce the intensity when I had them, but it did reduce the frequency.
Well, it was really helpful for me, and I've worked with a lot of migraine patients since then, and we just take a very low and slow approach to dose with it, and the reason is that we find that I found in my experience working with these patients that they often get bounce back headaches if they start to increase their cannabis dose dramatically. And so what we want to do is find just that threshold, that minimum effective dose, and stick with it. And it avoids a lot of other problems too, like tolerance and these bounce back headaches.
Yeah, well, we've heard that now from virtually every expert like yourself that we've had on the show is go low and slow is the way to break into this medicine, especially if you're using it in a tincture format or something like that. Let's move on to something you touched on that is controversial out there in the world, but not with Mary Lynn and I and Patients at a Time. And that is the ratio of CBD to THC. You're well aware, as if most of our listeners, is that there's a rash of CBD oil-only laws being passed in the United States in order to try to help some young people who have epilepsy-type problems. And yes, I have to admit, I will say right out, that yes, some of these children are helped by this oil, but in the main, we believe that a more balanced approach to THC and CBD and other compounds of the whole plant are necessary to really be effective. And what's your pharmacological take on that theory?
Well, I mean, human beings have been using cannabis for at least 12,500 years. And, there's this whole coevolution hypothesis that's been, promoted by people like John McPartland and Jeffrey Guy, and I ascribe to that. I mean, I think that this idea that we have basically bred a chemical ecology within the cannabis plant that plays well with our own endocannabinoid system just makes sense. And I think what's happened is prohibition of cannabis in the United States and the rest of the world has profoundly affected this chemical ecology and pushed it towards THC. Now, that's not unusual in any prohibition situation. Beer basically disappeared in the United States during alcohol prohibition, and the use of spirits went way up. And I think the same thing's happened with cannabis. What we've seen is an emphasis on THC that's continued, especially since the introduction of Afghani varieties in the late 1970s. And it was inadvertent. These products weren't tested, but what they were measured as far as their quality, they were measured by their level of psychoactivity, which put the emphasis on high THC cannabis cultivars. Recently, with the advent of laboratories around the United States testing cannabis, at least for THC, CBD, and the oxidation product, CBN, what we've seen is more CBD cultivars become available to patients. But now we're seeing a backlash towards any THC as medicine with these CBD-only laws. And I think that's as wrong-headed as developing only high THC cultivars. My contention is that patients are best served by a plant that has a broad chemical ecology that includes cannabinoids such as CBG, potentially THCV and CBDV, and another cannabinoid called CBC that we haven't studied as much as some of the other cannabinoids, but may be of great medicinal value down the road. It's interesting to note that some of these pediatric epilepsy patients that don't respond to CBD do potentially respond to CBDV, a variant that's found in certain plants from Pakistan and Kashmir. And also some of these patients... We got a break, Michael. Okay, no worries.
We got a break. I'm glad you were going there, and we'll come back to this because it's a very important subject in our country right now, and our listeners need to understand what you're saying. So be patient with us, Michael, and listeners, and we'll be back here in just 3 or 4 minutes.
Thanks.
You are listening to the Time for Hemp Global Broadcasting Network. Please share us with your friends.
THCF Medical Clinics are the premier physicians clinic in the United States. THCF has offices all across the United States from Hawaii to Michigan. THCF Medical Clinics has helped approximately 150,000 patients obtain their medical marijuana permits to legally possess, grow, and use medical marijuana. If you have chronic pain, multiple sclerosis, or any other neurological degenerative disease, or if you have any gastrointestinal disorders such as GERD, irritable bowel syndrome, or if you have AIDS, cancer, spastic disorders, seizure disorders, or glaucoma, call us at 1-800-723-0188 or visit us online at hemp.org. Again, the number is 1-800-723-0188 and the site is hemp.org.
Oh.
Why wished I had you here. Smell your sweet bouquet. Well, some men fall for women, and some men, they like wine. But I'm only half a man, unless I'm getting high. My sweet hydro, my sweet hydro. If I only had a bowl, I wouldn't be so alone, my sweet hydro. Now you're soft and mellow toe. The scent is so divine, and I just want you to know that I'd smoke you all the time, my sweet hydro, my sweet hydro. If I only had a bowl, I wouldn't be so alone, my sweet hydro.
You are listening to Time for Hemp on the Time for Hemp Global Broadcasting Network. We are no longer just a 1-hour broadcasting show. In fact, we are now broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week with a team of people on the broadcasting network. We have people like Judge James Gray, who gives a great show, and we've got Ben Swan, who's won 2 Emmys and 2 Edward R. Murrow Awards, doing reporting for the broadcast. We've got Chris Conrad, one of the founders of the marijuana movement. Steve Bloom does Celeb Stoner. We broadcast twice a week in Spanish for an hour, every Tuesday and Thursday afternoon. Every Friday afternoon for an hour, we broadcast all in French. We do a show in Japanese every other week for an hour in the morning on Fridays. And, of course, we are broadcasting in the language of English from Canada and England and America and Australia. Soon joining our broadcasting network will be John Sinclair from Amsterdam. So as you can tell, we have an awful lot to offer to people who are wanting to learn why it is so important to end prohibition and take time for hemp. Please share us with your friends. Now that I've done that shameless plug for my network and my show, I will pass this broadcast segment over to my joint host, Mary Lynn Mathre and Al Byrne.
Thank you, Casper, and that was shameless of you, but we're used to that with you. St. Clair, John St. Clair, what a welcome addition to the network. A fine man who's certainly shared some of the grief that that this whole issue has brought to so many people. But let's return to Michael Backus. Michael was talking about the various compounds in the cannabis plant. I should say that I've been happy, in a way, that the cops and the lawyers that make up medical rules for all of us concerning cannabis actually have learned, Michael, that there is another compound in the cannabis plant besides a THC. They now know there's CBD, but I don't think they know that there's a whole bunch of cannabinoids in there. And how about explaining to the listeners what are we dealing with here, and what do we know, and how much more do we have yet to find out about these cannabinoids?
Well, I mean, there's a lot to learn. I mean, what we've done is we've identified them, and I think the next thing we really need to do is focus on not only their individual effects, but their effects when they have synergy with each other and form what are called entourages. The cannabis plant is really, really complex. The current quote coming out of the American Herbal Pharmacopoeia monograph on cannabis is over 750 ingredients in the plant, and while the number of active ingredients is considerably smaller than that, we have to understand that there are probably 8 or 9 cannabinoids that are produced in volume by the plant that have very, very distinct pharmacologies and effects. And as we start to understand them and how they interact with each other, for example, with THC and CBD, the thing that's really interesting is that CBD seems to reduce a lot of the side effects that can affect some patients that use cannabis as a medicine. And so if you give a patient a pure THC cultivar, they potentially can get anxious from or have other side effects, and those side effects can be reduced considerably just by the addition of a cultivar that produces a slight amount of CBD. Another cannabinoid of great interest currently, and emerging interest, is THCV, a variant associated with Southern African and some Central Asian cannabis, and it's really interesting because instead of appetite stimulation or the munchies, THCV seems to actually suppress appetite, and it's of potential interest in metabolic conditions such as diabetes, where a person's pancreas isn't functioning as well as it once was. And because diabetes is potentially a $500 billion healthcare hit in the United States by 2020, an herbal remedy such as high THCV cannabis could be of great assistance in reducing that health cost.
Yeah. Let's go do one thing here, if I may, Michael, because you've said the word twice, and I want that emphasized that nobody misses it. Cannabis is an herb. It's a plant. It grows in the ground, and it has been classified, as Michael points out, by the American Pharmacological Association to be an herb, something that an herb, therefore, can be eaten. It can be used as a food for nutrition, and done so, eaten cold. In other words, without the application of heat, cannabis has no psychoactive or intoxicating capabilities, I should say, no intoxicating capabilities. So it's a plant, it's an herb, and it's a food, and I would call it a medicinal herb. And what we're saying, I hope we're saying, Michael, is that from this plant, we can make certain drug combinations up, but we don't know about them all yet. Is that what we're into right now?
Well, what's great about it is we don't know about all the effects yet, but we do know that if you control your dose and you use a clean product, the safety of cannabis as a medicine is extraordinary. And that's one thing that is an incredible benefit, because there are a lot of herbal medicines out there that are actually can be mildly toxic if you don't control your dose. And the nice thing about cannabis is that it's effective at a very, very wide range of dose, depending on the medical symptom you're trying to address.
Also in cannabis, for the edification of everybody, how about telling us about the flavonoids and the other parts of the plant that aren't generally discussed in, at least among the legal and law enforcement world?
Well, I mean, there's some really fascinating compounds like the terpenoids, which are responsible for the smell and flavor aspects of different cannabis varieties. And what's fascinating about them is that these terpenes are also produced by over 60,000 other plants, but they are synergistic with the cannabinoids produced by cannabis. And so they modify the effect. For example, pinene, that's responsible for kind of a pine needle effect in some varieties, seems to protect your memory from some of the side effects of high THC cultivars. So you don't lose your keys, and you remember to take your other medicines. And there are things like limonene and linalool and these other terpenes that are very pharmacologically active. Linalool is produced by lavender and is very relaxing and calming and can really help in recovery for patients, seeking bed rest in combination with some cannabinoids like THC.
When you went to school and you were studying biology, did you ever hear any of this?
Oh, no, not at all. Not at all. I mean, it's really interesting. I love to collect books about cannabis, and I have quite a collection of books from the 60s and 70s, and I was in college in the 70s. And the thing that's fascinating is just they just didn't know anything about this. But you got to understand, of course, that the endocannabinoid system wasn't really characterized until the late 1980s. And that's a big deal because a lot of doctors that are practicing medicine today were never taught anything about the endocannabinoid system, let alone cannabis as a medicine.
Well, that's why I asked the question, Michael, because at the present time, they're still not being taught. Our investigation now indicates there is only one university that has a medical school in the United States that is teaching a course or courses on the endocannabinoid system in medical cannabis, and that's in Philadelphia. That's Temple University.
Of course, along with Andy Weil's integrative medicine.
Well, yeah, I mean, the integrative medicine of Dr. Weil and his people are certainly, but in the regular, if you will, the regular old medical schools and nursing schools, this still isn't being taught. So I asked, that was a loaded question. I didn't get it. I was in college in the 60s. You were there in the 70s. I didn't expect to hear this. But if I was going into college right now in pre-med, I would expect to hear this. And this is not even being talked about in medical schools for seniors. I mean, this is amazing lack of education. It's
amazing
almost
censorship.
It's amazing censorship. I mean, it's just crazy.
Well, I think a lot of it has been driven by the fact that when you're young doctors who are going through medical school or doctors to be are going through medical school, and they're only taught about cannabis and its derivatives in relation to being a drug of abuse, then you've got a real problem. And the thing is that it's ironic that in 1942, when cannabis was removed from the U.S. Pharmacopoeia, it was removed under the objections at the time of the American Medical Association. It's only been a couple of years since the American Medical Association has kind of come back to the table and said, we've got to start looking at this as a medicine and we have to start doing research. I think the big reason doctors aren't hearing about this is fundamentally the restrictions on research in the United States under cannabis prohibition. The more we study it, the more likely our doctors are to learn about it. And right now, it's really hard to study it, as we know.
Well, that's why I want to repeat again, www.themedicalcannabisinstitute.org has right there for medical doctors, pharmacists, nurses to take accredited courses online to try and close this gap.
And I think
I think that point.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to note, as you said, we've all been brought up with marijuana. Everybody's talking about marijuana, and the only way you think about marijuana is drug of abuse, and trying to get them to switch over to cannabis. And again, you're right with the AMA. they're squeaking back, just slowly, very hesitantly saying we're open to research. They still can't open the door as wide as they should.
Well, I don't know about you, Michael, but I just think the AMA is a political institution. It doesn't seem to have much hold on education as far as I can see. But right now we got to take another break. We're closing in on break time. This will be a short one, folks, and we'll be back in just a couple of minutes with Michael Backus.
Thanks.
You are listening to the Time for Hemp Global Broadcasting Network. Please share us with your friends.
Indigrow is your source for affordable induction grow lighting. First discovered in 1891 by Nikola Tesla, Indigrow lights deliver 11 years of electronic sunlight to your plants. Indigrow lamps require less than half the power of traditional HID lamps. Converting to Indigrow lights means you'll cut down on your power bill with less lighting. Indigrow lamps also use 5 times less mercury than traditional fluorescent or HID lamps, making Indigrow not only energy efficient but environmentally friendly as well. No more switching out lamps between vegetative and flowering stages. As nature intended, your lights get a steady dose of UV light. That makes your plants grow healthier and stronger. Indigrow products are manufactured in San Diego, California, and come with a written 10-year warranty. What Tesla knew, then growers know now, is that Indigrow lighting is the cost-effective addition to your victory garden. To learn more or order now, go to inda-grow.com. That's INDA-GRO.com, or call 877-452-2244 to answer any of your questions. These guys really know lights. Indigrow really is your sunlight in a box.
Yes, it does come from the earth, and we ask that you do stay alert with consciousness. Be responsible, I mean, if you look at the side of a prescription bottle for painkillers, oftentimes it will say, do not drive heavy equipment using this medication, or at least until you've gotten used to this medication. Well, that's true with anything, I mean, even sugar can cause you to get too tired all of a sudden when you least expect it. So before you start putting others at risk, find out what the substance you're utilizing does to you before you move forward. That's my little dinky rant for the day. We are doing Healthy Mondays, and we are focusing on how wonderful cannabis is for our body, mind, and spirit with Lynn, Mathre, and Al Byrne. And I pass the joint conversation back to you.
Thank you, Casper. Michael, I'd like to go back to your book, Cannabis Pharmacy. It's available from, let's see, who is it? Black Dog and Leventhal is the publishers. It's just been put out. It's a great book. And on the back, as part of the summary, it indicates, Michael, that you have done some study on the use of cannabis for a number of different ailments. And one that stands out to me that I'd like you to discuss what you know about it, please, is Alzheimer's and cannabis.
Sure. I mean, there's some very, very recent, and even more recent than the book, studies that are coming out that seem to indicate that low doses of THC found in cannabis can actually reduce the buildup of these amyloid beta plaques that seem to be one of the key factors in the progression of Alzheimer's disease. It appears as if in the next couple of years, cannabis is really going to come to the fore as a potentially significant treatment to actually reduce the progression of the disease, we think. What's really fascinating about how it can be used today is that if you go back to the 19th century, John Reynolds, who was a prominent British physician in England in the 19th century, and also Queen Victoria's doctor, worked with a dementia / Alzheimer's patient back then who got up every night out of bed and packed up his clothes to go home from the hospital in which he was living. And Reynolds treated him with Indian hemp tincture, and that behavior completely went away. And without overly sedating the patient, calmed him down and got rid of a lot of the kind of agitation symptoms that are commonly associated with Alzheimer's. So there's not only, it's useful in our future, it's useful in our present, and it's been used in the past successfully with Alzheimer's.
Yeah, we had a presentation at a past conference by Dr. Gary Wink from Indiana and Ohio. I'm sorry, and he had a little phrase which I thought at the time might be overstating, but apparently it is not. And his little thing about Alzheimer's and cannabis was to stop the progression, one puff is enough. And basically he's saying what you're saying is that reasonably low doses of cannabis on a regular basis can apparently stop or at least slow progression of the Alzheimer's disease. Yeah, the other thing, maybe you... Go ahead.
Well, yeah, I was just going to... what I was going to say... All right, let's...
Go ahead, Al. Ask your question.
All right. I didn't want to interrupt you, Michael, but I'm trying to get as much information to the listeners out as I can because some of these things are not discussed and they should be. Another thing that you mentioned here is cannabis and Parkinson's. Could you do a little brief on Parkinson's and cannabis, please?
Well, I mean, and here's where we have to look at this warts and all, because right now we're still trying to understand the best way to use cannabis as a medicine with Parkinson's. The research results have been inconsistent so far. In some cases, it's remarkably good in some studies, it's been remarkably good at reducing tremor and some of these side effects. It definitely can help with speech deficits that are noted in Parkinson's progression. But we haven't found the right combo yet of cannabinoid medicines, in my opinion, to be most effective with Parkinson's. And that's what's most exciting about this, is that we have so much left to learn about the interactions of these compounds that the plant produces, that my feeling is we're going to find a much more effective combination for Parkinson's in the next couple of years.
Yeah, I would hope so, and I agree with you. My brother, who retired from the Coast Guard after 26 years, was actually medically retired with Parkinson's and used cannabis therapeutically for that disease. And he was actually a patient of Dr. Todd Mickeria, a friend of ours. And Todd watched his progression, and he kind of just agreed with you. My brother was not particularly helped by the cannabis, but his speech did improve. It helped him communicate, which for him was, a good thing.
Side effects of his other medications.
Yeah.
I love, by the way, that you mentioned. I love that you mentioned Todd Mickeria, because to me, as Fred Gardner calls him, he's kind of the American Meshulam, and his legacy in American cannabis medicine should never be overlooked. He made an extraordinary contribution at a time when it was extremely dangerous to make that contribution.
That's right. He took a lot of abuse for his courage. I'm proud to say he was one of the founding members of our board of advisors on Patients at a Time. Spoke at a couple of our conferences when we needed people of his stature to help us to teach people that, hey, that this is real, and we've got people like Todd that are willing to stand up and tell you it's real. So, yeah, if you don't know about Dr. Todd Mickeria, folks, Google him. It's worth a read. And Fred Gardner is another guy that is a stand-up fella, and he believed, I believe it was Fred and Todd that started O'Shaughnessy's up, and the Society for Cannabis Clinicians as well.
Yeah, they're Pioneers, and we owe them a great deal of debt.
Tell us about the Herbal Products Association, the pharmacopoeia. Why is this important to people that want to use cannabis medically?
Well, the American Herbal Products Association is the primary lobbying group for dietary supplements and herbal medicines with the FDA. They really go and take on the regulators to make sure that the regulations are good, that they protect patients, but they also allow access and enable access to herbal medicines. And in the last few years, they formed a cannabis committee to come up with guidelines, suggested guidelines for regulators that are evidence-based and kind of bring together best practices to make sure that when states pass medical cannabis laws and enable access to cannabis, that patients get the best treatment possible and get the best products possible. The American Herbal Pharmacopoeia is interesting because since cannabis was removed from the U.S. Pharmacopoeia in 1942, there hadn't been a science-based monograph on quality control, analytical standards, or therapeutic uses of cannabis. And right now, the American Herbal Pharmacopoeia in California, led by Roy Upton, and helped by Raphael Meshulam, Mark Ware, Ethan Russo, Michelle Sexton, all of these people, and a host of reviewers are now, and the Americans for Safe Access as well, have put together this monograph series. And the first volume's out. Another volume's expected in a few weeks. And this will be evidence-based information that regulators and doctors and patients can rely on to know what's in their medicine and what it can be used for based on solid scientific research.
Before we lose time here, let's put in your information. How do people get a hold of your book, Michael?
So Cannabis Pharmacy, my new book, is available through all the major booksellers in the United States, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. Almost all the independent bookstores are carrying it. Workman Publishing is distributing it. They're a great distributor, and I think it's going to be available to a lot of patients and doctors. And I really designed this book to be just a basic guidebook for patients and physicians that would lead them to things like Patients Out of Time, where I got a lot of my education. And you know, doctors like Ethan Russo and Raphael Meshulam and Celia Morgan and these doctors who've been cutting edge, providing this kind of information to patients for quite some time, but it hasn't really percolated, and I want my book to help do that.
Yeah, well, I think it will, and I appreciate the effort. And just so everybody understands again, the name of the book is Cannabis Pharmacy, and the author's name is Michael Backus. I'm going to spell that for the audience, Backes. While I'm doing that, I'm going to repeat again some other URLs that I want everybody to be aware of. One is www.themedicalcannabisinstitute.org, designed specifically for healthcare professionals to take accredited online e-learning courses that will give them not only basic information about clinical cannabis use in the endocannabinoid system, but as they go through the institute, they will find as much detail and explanation from the people that Michael and I have been talking about with Mary Lynn here today. Excellent, excellent education, and actually the only education that we know of now available in the world like it. In addition to that, I'd like you to be aware that we're trying to get some 10,000 veterans to attend to a survey of their cannabis use for post-traumatic stress. These would be veterans that would be legal patients in a legal state, and we'd like to get them to go and look at this survey requirements, and it's
www.vetptsdstudy.org.
Vets with an S, vetptsdstudy.org, just so everybody understands. Michael, we've got about 2 or 3, 4 minutes here. Anything you want to just emphasize before we have to say goodbye?
Sure, just quickly. I mean, I think that the most important conversation we can have about cannabis medicines right now is the dosage of those medicines. Because cannabis is non-toxic, people have a tendency to take too much of it. And so the idea, and something that Al brought up, is that there is evidence now that for certain conditions like neuropathic pain, cannabis is effective at extremely low doses. Doses of THC that are actually below the threshold of psychoactivity in most cases. And so the important thing for people to be aware of is control your dose, or your dose will control you.
That's a good way to look at it.
That's a good line, yeah. I got to remember that one. And yeah, that reminds me, George McMahon, one of our directors and a federal patient, he has always told me for 20 years that he really likes the really low THC. I call it swag, but that the government sends him because it kills his pain without a lot of intoxication. So you just made another patient testimony there, given reasons that make sense.
Yeah, I think. Go ahead.
I was just going to expound on that in that it's not only different doses for different conditions or illnesses, and then among those conditions, different doses among the different patients. And I think a lot probably has to do with their own functioning of their endocannabinoid system.
Exactly, and the thing is that I think you have to, I look at the endocannabinoid system as a teeter-totter. It's a balancing act. It's a homeostatic regulatory system, and the thing that's important is don't shove too much phytocannabinoids into that system because you'll upset the balance. And I think that the idea is that people should really be conscious of their dose, and they'll get more medicinal effect.
Well, I'll take that as the last piece of wisdom. Michael, really interesting show. Told us and taught us a lot. Thank you so much for being a guest. And again, folks, Michael Backus, Cannabis Pharmacy, the author.
Thanks very much. Really enjoyed it, Mary Lynn and Al. Thanks, Casper.
We'll get you back. We'll get you back, too. And for our listeners, again, we're representing Patients Out of Time. You can find our basics information and everything we've just talked about today in different forms and varieties at www.medicalcannabis.com. You'll hear from us again at 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time on Time for Hemp on next Sunday, where we'll hopefully be interviewing an American veteran, a military veteran using cannabis. And then again, next week at the same time, same place with Casper Leitch on Time for Hemp. And then, until then, take care.
And I want to remind people that we are a broadcasting network of over 40 hosts, producing over 65 hours a week of original broadcasting content about the need to end prohibition. And we certainly appreciate it when you share us with your friends. And it's also nice when you repost our MP3s and make it easy for people to find out why it's so important to take Time for Hemp.
Look at all that money, yeah, the money that they spent. Take another look and spend some time for hemp. Don't cut trees for paper, 'cause it hurts the environment. Stop deforestation, yes, it's time for hemp. Whoa, an acre of hemp makes 20 bales of oil. No need for pesticides to poison all our soil. People got no food, they got no clothes, they got no rent.
Speaking for the legalization of marijuana. Awo, 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 awa, awa, sata ama sagana la la Gabriel la madani la me chant, me chant, me chant, me chant. Oh, says I fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. No, me no fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. Take a look in Genesis and me say book number 1. Can make the herb seed for the human. It start way back on from creation. That was the time when the weed come from. So can make the herb give it unto Adam. That man they lose, that's how make it find Abraham. Old man Moses climb on Zion. How will they find the seed in the grave of Solomon? Fireman know it is the weed of wisdom. Some communion for inspiration. I know they want to take me chalice out of me and them fight against long time tradition. Babylon is a man with wicked intention. All Babylon they mean a malfunction. Every Rasta man is a conscious man. Plant a seed and start a weed revolution, man. Oh, says I fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. No, me no fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. They find the cure for cancer in a Maviana. And if you sick and you no fit, you want feeling the chalwa. Gabriel Alamla, Sata Amasagana. Peace and love, give thanks and praise before you burn the ganja. That is the blessing from Almighty Jaja. And who bring the message, the liquor rocker. Me born and me grow as a New Yorker. But when me go round the world, they say me from America. Look in me left pocket, find a bag of ganja. Look in the same pocket, I find me lighter. Look in the next pocket, $1.25. Bring me a orange juice, I'm too high for liquor. But you make a the boom type of sense in me. And if you have a little hash, I mix it together. You pass me the herb and the Dutch master. I wake up on the sense in me up on the street corner. So, oh, says I feel Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. No, me no fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. Me talking some roots rock and reality. And up on the mic now the one rockety. Me born and me grow in a New York City. Me come fit it's the people love and unity. It's every type of man them we smoke sense. The young and the middle and the elderly. The rich man and the man we living in a poverty. Some them are belly full and some them are hungry. So when we get together in a we community, we take a one jar for all our family and pass it round the cipher 1, 2, 3 degrees. I know you got to bless that you want it done properly. The healing of the nation certainly. You light it and you pass it and you feel highway. Some them a follow me, some them a disagree. Nobody could have ever take away my sensity. Oh, says I fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. No, me no fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. Oh, says I fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. No, me no fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. Awo, awo, awa, awa. Ich gabe de masagan, sata amasagan, ala amlak, madani halam, me chant. Oh, says I fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. No, me no fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. Come on, oh, says I fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. No, me no fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. Come on, oh, says I fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. No, me no fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. Come on, oh, says I fear Babylon. Tell them say I'm a true ganja man. Puff it up, smoke it up, y'all.
You are listening to the Time for Hemp Global Broadcasting Network. Please share us